qualitatively different about the threat stream we had seen was it was multiple threat streams that were all perhaps coming together in time. And what's not new are threat streams. What was new was a pattern of threat streams that extended from Yemen, so threats emanating from Yemen, threats in the Gulf, and threats in Iraq. We watched that very carefully on Friday evening. We sent a message at that time to Iran just to make sure that they understood that we would hold them accountable should something take place in the region, that there was not an opportunity for them to do things and then claim it wasn't attributable to Iran. So we wanted to mitigate the risk of miscalculation. We also saw in the intelligence that perhaps there was a question about both the will and the capability of the United States to respond. And so throughout the weekend, I had a dialogue with General McKenzie, who's our commander at the United States Central Command. And by Sunday morning, we recommended to the Secretary of Defense that the Abraham Lincoln carrier strike group that was in the Mediterranean be immediately ordered to the United States Central Command. By the way, we averaged more than 2 carrier strike groups on station in 2012 in the Central Command at any given time. We had 0 on the weekend of the 3rd, the 4th, and 5th of May. And we also sent bombers there, as well as some Patriot missile systems. Those were designed to address what I saw as a gap in perception. So we wanted to make sure that we addressed 3 things to mitigate the risk of miscalculation. One, we wanted the Iranians to know that if they did anything, it would be attributable to them. Number 2, we wanted them to know that we had the capability to respond in the event that deterrence fails, and that was the force elements that we sent in on the weekend of the 3rd to the 5th of May. And the last was to make sure that those force elements then were a manifestation of our will to respond. This was all designed to enhance deterrence. And again, what I would argue was qualitatively different was we saw something that looked more like a campaign than an individual threat. And it was the geographic span and the perception that that activity would try to be synchronized in time that caused us to look at that threat differently than 40 years, by the way, of malign activity by the Iranians. So malign activity and threats to our forces by the Iranians were not new, but a more widespread, almost campaign-like perspective for the Iranians was what we were dealing with. And in any event, by the way, people can question the veracity of the intelligence. All I would say is, since that weekend, there have been ships that have been hit with mines. There have been UAV strikes. There have been rocket strikes in the proximity of the United States Embassy in Iraq. All that activity has happened since the weekend of the 3rd, 4th, and the 5th. Situation in 2015, obviously much worse. The ISIS has been cleared from the ground that they held in Iraq and Syria. Iraqi security forces are, by and large, providing security in our own country. The partners that we have on the ground in Syria, with a relatively small U.S. footprint, are securing that area that has been cleared from ISIS. But I would say, we describe violent extremism as a generational conflict, and I wouldn't take issue with that characterization. And so while we have made great progress against ISIS, that fight remains. So what I would, and you brought up the 4+1 becoming a 2+3, I would argue that we probably have put a better framework to deal with these challenges out there since 2015. But I wouldn't argue that the situation in the world is more stable, or that Kissinger's words don't ring more true to me today than they did in 2015.